I'd like to call the meeting to order of the Nevada Board. Commissioner Young. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Suzanne, would you call the roll of the commission, please? Here.
Here.
Thank you, Suzanne. And would the county advisory boards please stand and announce themselves, please? Thank you. Welcome. Moving on to agenda item number 2, approval of the agenda. Chairman Wallace, for possible action, the commission will review the agenda and may take action to approve the agenda. The commission may remove items from the agenda, continue items for consideration, or take items out of order. The first thing that I have is we have agenda item number 4 was changed at the last meeting to allow for the governor, who was here at the time, to take part in some of those updates. And I would like to see if we could get that set up at the call of the chair to put it down later, maybe after or before the department activity report. Any commissioners have comments on the agenda? Seeing none, this is an action item. I'll take it out for public comment. Public comment? Seeing none, I'll bring it back to the commission.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion to approve the agenda as presented with the exception that item number 4, Nevada Department of Wildlife project updates, shall be considered at the call of the chair.
I have a motion by Commissioner Johnston and a second by Commissioner Almberg. Any questions from the commission on the motion? Seeing none, I'll call for a vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, motion passes unanimously. Moving to agenda item number 3, Nevada Lands Act. Section A, Nevada Land Management Task Force Senate Joint Resolution 1 of the 2015 Nevada Legislature and subsequent federal legislation update. Commissioner Drew informational. Commissioner Drew will review the history of the Nevada Land Management Task Force, SJR1, and subsequent federal legislation in regards to the transfer of no less than 7.2 million acres of public lands currently administered by the Bureau of Land Management and U.S. Forest Service to the state of Nevada. Commissioner Drew, one more quick thing, just something new that's going on today. We're actually broadcasting live on YouTube. So I just thought I would put that out there. I meant to say that earlier, but we're giving that a try. So wish us luck. Commissioner Drew.
Thank you, Chairman Wallace. And the primary purpose of this agenda item is to offer information to those who have expressed a lot of interest and or concern in the movement to transfer public lands to the state of Nevada. And so what you'll see here is a multi-part agenda item. I'm going to try and cover a lot of ground in a short period of time. Then we'll hear from Mr. Dahl. I appreciate him being here today. And then we'll have an action item, part C of this agenda. And I know there's a fair amount of people here who want to maybe express their views, and you'll get your opportunity under item C. So with that, just some background. Again, during the 2013 legislative session, AB 227 was passed. In a nutshell, the bill established the Nevada Land Management Task Force and was tasked with studying the potential transfer of public lands currently under federal ownership or management to the state of Nevada. That task force was made up of 17 members, one from each county as assigned by the county commission. Mr. Dahl, again, who is here today, was chair of that task force. In July of 2014, the task force completed its final report. That was attached under agenda item A as support material for everyone's review. During the 2015 legislative session, the recommendations of the report were generally incorporated into Senate Joint Resolution 1, better known as SGR 1, also attached to your support material. Just generally, SGR 1 proposed 2 phases. Phase 1 would transfer 7.2 million acres of land managed by the BLM, geothermal leases, solar energies expressed in SGR 1. 1 generally laid out where the senior and vet services and programs opposed to SGR 4, land transactions or other activities attendant to public lands. In order to accomplish these objectives, the department should consider the following listed criteria in providing written or verbal comments on public. Higher values for wildlife can be attained through a sale, transfer, or exchange. 2, land exchanges should be supported only when the wildlife values on select lands are equal to or greater than those wildlife values or potential wildlife values on offered lands. 3, input on all public land transactions should consider the need for public access to and through both the offered and selected lands. And 4, all land transactions will be in the public interest from a wildlife habitat protection and wildlife use standpoint. That policy was actually adopted clear back in December of 1995. This body has, I think, reviewed and discussed that policy several times since. Congressman Amity did introduce a bill in the 114th Congress, H.R. 1484, that largely mirrored SGR 1. A hearing was held in December of last year, but the House resolution essentially died when the 114th Congress convened in December. I was lucky enough to be invited to a listening session yesterday morning with Congressman Amity. I appreciate his time and the invitation. Just some of the key points that I took away from the meeting. He indicated that obviously H.R. 1484 was requested by his constituents through SGR 1, so he was happy to sponsor it to begin a dialogue. However, he did reiterate that that bill did die in the 114th Congress. He does intend to introduce a bill or series of bills in the 115th Congress, as well as developing more clear reference materials, primarily maps, that show and identify some of these lands. It is likely that the new bill or bills will have a much different focus and likely a smaller footprint. 4, he is welcome to input and suggestions, whether that's absolute opposition to the proposal or any suggestions on ways to improve his bills. And 5, a lot of the discussion focused on the federal government's lack of ability or slow action in terms of moving on lands identified for disposal. There was also a lot of discussion regarding resolution of the checkerboard pattern, primarily along Interstate 80. I just wanted to reflect some of my personal inputs. I did reiterate that this commission had opposed SGR 1. I indicated that certainly I wanted to see the state succeed going forward, and in my opinion, SGR 1 and HR 1484 was not just taking a bite out of the apple in terms of dealing with federal public lands, but trying to swallow the whole apple, and my fear was that the state was going to choke on it. There was a lot of discussion around the Southern Nevada Public Lands Management Act and the money that some of the sales of federal lands develop for conservation. I pointed out that what's in SGR 1 and what's in the Southern Nevada Public Lands Management Act is vastly different in terms of how that money would be spent. We talked a little bit about the checkerboard lands. I proposed that if we're going to look at dealing with checkerboards, that in my opinion we should look at preserving those high-value wildlife habitats and movement corridors as public lands and make sure we provided access. So essentially I was proposing no net loss of public lands or access within the checkerboard. I felt that the phase 2 should be dropped in its entirety. and I had a little bit of discussion, which I'll have some questions for Mr. Dahl on in terms of the task force report and some of the dollars that would actually be associated with the physical transfer of any land. So at that point, I think that gives everyone the summary, reaching back to the 2013 legislature through yesterday. I look forward to Mr. Dahl's presentation and subsequent inputs. I think there's going to be a lot of interest in this item. I think folks understand, even in the phase 1 land, whether it be checkerboard or otherwise, that there are some very important wildlife habitats and values and important access to public lands. And so I anticipate a robust discussion and public comment when we get to item C. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Drew. Nevada Lands Council presentation by Damar Dahl, NLC Director Informational. NLC Director Damar Dahl will provide a presentation to the Commission regarding the efforts of the NLC to support federal legislation that would transfer federally managed public lands to the state of Nevada. Come on up, Mr. Dahl. Thank you for coming today.
And discuss this issue. Jeremy covered pretty well, I think, the outline, at least, of what has taken place on this so far. I want to give you just a little bit of the history. This started as an access problem. And there's a lot of misinformation going around that this is going to cause the state of Nevada to be sold, and it'll be like Texas, and we'll have no trespassing signs every place, and you won't be able to hunt on it. And the idea for this bill, or the idea that, or what brought this on, was access problem. When the Forest Service came to our county commission in Elko in 2009 and said, we're going to do a travel management plan, we don't anticipate closing any roads, and we want you to sign up as a cooperating agency. We said, sure, we'll do that. And then we found out, indeed, there were going to be a lot of roads closed. And so we started pushing back, and that got things going where I got invited to testify before the subcommittee, Natural Resource Subcommittee. Congressman Amadei got the chair of that subcommittee, Rob Bishop, to come to Elko and hold a hearing. And then that led to AB 227, which created the task force. And then the task force met for a year. You know, the value of education is really pointed out here, how it worked, how the task force worked. We had 15 members of the task force, and we decided right up front, we're not going to vote on anything until we get a lot of information. And I said, let's not vote on anything except one thing. How many of you think it's a good idea to transfer the public land from the federal government to the state? And more than half thought it was not a good idea. And then we went through a year meeting at least once a month. I think we had 13 meetings. We started out with contracting for an economic analysis. And then we had testimony from our state agency people. By the way, that economic analysis told us that at a minimum, the state could expect a net revenue of $350 million from managing its own land. We had testimony from our state agency people. The question for them was to get from where we are to where we have to be to manage our own land. What do we have to do? And we found out, yeah, we can do that. And then we had testimony from all of the stakeholders that we could get to come in and tell us, everybody from the Sierra Club to the Farm Bureau. And by the time we finished, we had complete agreement that it was a good idea to transfer the public land. And you could just kind of see the lights come on as we went through that year. I see that there are There are some, at least I see one person who I think has changed their mind since then, but at the end of that year, after all of the information that we had gotten, every commissioner went back to their own county commission, and every county commission approved our resolution, which then became SJR1. So we started out with agreement there. And what we decided there was that we wanted, number one, to take off the table the national monuments, the national parks, wilderness areas, Indian lands, of course, military lands, they weren't to be considered. And then we wanted all of the valid existing rights to transfer. In other words, and uses. And so when that bill was crafted, 1484, it says all valid existing rights and uses. So that anything that you can do out there today, you would be able to do after that, after the land transfers. If you can hunt, fish, camp, graze, prospect, whatever, those valid existing rights transfer. The other thing that we were all in agreement on, we did not want to see the public land sold. And so then when that evolved from SJR1 into 1484, the language on that in phase 2 was very specific. None of phase 2 could be sold. So it's going to continue to belong to the state. So then the question is, do you believe and do I believe that the state can manage our public lands as good as our federal government does? And if you've been paying a lot of attention, and I'm sure that the people that are here have been, there can be a lot of improvement over the way the federal government handles our public lands. Everything from shutting off access to fighting fire. We can do better, the state can do better. Well, I want to give you time to ask all of the questions that you want of me. I just wanted to emphasize, because we have heard so much, just that same mantra over and over. It's going to be sold. It's going to be sold. The state can't manage it. Well, why not? Why not? And if it started to be sold, just the people that are here today would just be a very small part of the group that would show up that would say, no, you're not going to sell it. And right here in Carson City is where the decision would be made. And when we try to, I had an interesting meeting with Donald Trump. And I asked him, if you had a hotel with 10 floors on it, and 8 of those floors were managed by a bureaucracy over 2,000 miles away that you had virtually no control over, how would that work? And he was up to speed. He said, yeah, I think you're more shaped than that. I think you're 87% federally owned in the state of Nevada and federally managed. So you just compare having something come at you as sportsmen that says, for instance, we're going to shut off access to a certain area that's important for sportsmen. Or, and the state does that, or the federal agencies do that. Then where do you think you have the best opportunity to reverse that? Where do you have the most clout? Right here across the street? Right here with our legislators? Or to go to Washington and you wander up and down the Potomac in the fog looking for somebody, whoever it was that made the decision, and then you find out that person who made the decision hadn't been here. They don't know what's going on out here. They're not elected. They don't answer to you. Just compare the difference. And I just cannot believe that we in the state of Nevada can't manage our own public land and do it better than it's being done now, and keep access. If you got questions, I'll be glad to try them.
Thank you, Mr. Dahl, and I think Commissioner Drew already alluded that he had some questions, so we'll start with Commissioner Drew.
Yeah, I had some pre-done questions, but I think your discussion this morning has probably prompted a few more, so I'll start with those and then yield the microphone. But you talked about the task force having state agency input. I'm curious if the Department of Wildlife was invited to be part of those discussions, because I don't recall at the time when the task force is going on, this body being asked to engage.
Yeah, we had state lands, we had NDEP, we had NDOW. I'm sure we did.
If you did in fact have NDOW, do you recall any of their input at the time?
Well, you know, I'd have to go back and look at that. It didn't, nothing that jumped out at me at least, or at us as a task force, or it would have, you know, would have shown up with all the stuff that we did. You know, and you've seen the task force report. So.
You had mentioned during your testimony that you don't want to see public land sold, and then you specifically mentioned phase 2. So I guess I'm curious about phase 1, because we're talking, I think it says something along the lines of no less than 7.2 million acres. Some of that's disposal land, but there's a whole lot of land in the checkerboard, which I think a lot of the people in this room probably have the greatest concern with. There's also right-of-ways and kind of bits and pieces everywhere else. So I'm curious as to your take in regards to selling lands in the phase 1 proposal.
Yeah, I should have made that clear. And this bill now, like you said, 1484 died, but all bills died that weren't passed out of the 114th Congress. So now this bill will be reintroduced. And the new bill, and I don't know, I wasn't able to be there yesterday when you were with Congressman Amity, but I don't know if he shared that with you, but it's kind of in a state of flux right now, and it's being changed here and there. But the language in the bill says up to 7.2 million acres will be transferred in phase 1 as the state determines what and how to do that transfer. And included in that is the land that is already designated for disposal by the federal agencies, 1 million plus, that they just haven't been able to get through their red tape to get it done. Easements and land on the corridor, which is about 4 million of that. Okay, now what that says is that land is going to be transferred to the state in phase 1. It doesn't say it's going to be sold, but it does say that land in phase 1 can be sold. So naturally, you would want to sell the land that's already been designated for disposal. Do you know that since the year 2000, the BLM has sold $3.1 billion worth of land in Nevada? Most of that is really high-priced land, you know, in the Las Vegas area. But besides the land designated for disposal, there's what's called the RP&P land, Recreation and Public Purposes land, that is owned by the federal government, has been for a long time, and leased. It has schools and county buildings and so on. And that land would undoubtedly be sold. And then there are lands along the railroad corridor that, you know, we've got 2 bills there now, the Pershing and the Washoe bill, trying to fix up some of the problems that have been along the corridor for a long time. There's lands, like part of those on the corridor are lands that are right around Elko, for instance. And when you talk to Pam Borda, who's head of our economic development there, she tells you the biggest problem that we've got companies that want to move in. We don't have area for them. We don't have room. We don't have a piece of land to put them on. And so those kind of lands would be sold. Lands at around a clover leaf on the freeway, I think. But there's about 4 million acres there, and I'm sure there would be a lot of that would not be sold. And one suggestion that I had given to me from David Von Segren the other day was, if we have places on the corridor that are good hunting areas, for instance, like mountain tops or mountains like the Pequot Mountains in Elko County, for instance. Let's just say when we do the bill, because we're all going to have a say-so in how it's going to be implemented, that will remain in multiple use. And so hunting areas that are important can be carved out of, because, you know, that corridor goes for 20 miles each side of the railroad. So there are some places, there's a lot of that land that you're not ever going to sell because it's not very valuable. And if there are those areas that are good for hunting, then keep it in multiple use. Makes sense.
Yeah, I think a couple of the points you made kind of spurred a couple of thoughts in my mind. So you talked about $3 billion from land sales in Las Vegas. I think that's the Southern Nevada Public Land Management Act.
3.1.
Right.
Yeah.
And I believe a lot of that money has been reinvested in conservation. So I'm curious as to your thoughts on these lands being sold in the Phase 1 land. And I think on Nevada Land Task Force webpage, it talks about 2 million acres or something like that. Where do you see the proceeds from those land sales going?
Well, the 1484 specified where that would go, mostly for education.
And I guess that kind of leads me to my next question. So you're from Elko County, you know the checkerboards well, you know the value of some of those areas for wildlife, hunting, and public access. And you had mentioned, you know, if there are some of those lands that are good for hunting. Well, there's a lot of those lands that are very important to wildlife, to hunters, whether it be wildlife habitat, whether it be migration corridors. And I'm sure you're aware of that. It just gives me pause when you say if there are. And
I didn't mean that there aren't, but if there are.
Right.
What I meant was that those lands, you know, I think it would make sense. Those would stay in multiple use. Those would not be for sale.
And I guess where I have an issue with the speed at which things are moving is that we haven't taken the exercise to identify which lands are highly important to access and wildlife. You know, we've identified Phase 1, but we haven't even seen a map of those areas that should remain in multiple use, and maybe if there's 2 million acres that are suitable for disposal, that where those lands might be. You know, I don't know that anyone's going to disagree with a piece of BLM land that's in between a highway right away or something like that. But we haven't taken that step, and my concern is, and I think I expressed this yesterday, that things are moving so fast and we're taking such a big bite. My fear is that we're setting the state up for failure. And I'm not coming at this holding the federal government up as a pillar of management of the federal lands. I've had plenty of issues, and I think this body has expressed plenty of issues with some of the things that go on, whether it be BLM or Forest Service. I'm a multi-generation native Nevadan. I love this state, but you asked the question, can the state do better? And right now, my answer would be no, because unless we have the funds up front to deal with those lands, I don't know that we can. We simply don't have the revenue or the funds to do that. I mean, the task force talks about, you know, state lands only having 7 employees right now, and we got to go to like 97 or something that it identified. This state has always struggled to find money for conservation. I don't see that changing. I wish it would. If there's a way through this process to figure out a way to reinvest funds back into conservation or a Nevada land account where we could block up some of those important lands, maybe I'd change my opinion. But right now, without funding identified, my answer is no. And if you can tell me where I'm wrong, I'm all ears.
Let me address your first question first, and that is that you're concerned that we haven't, you know, this is a work in progress. And you say it's going really fast. Well, it went fast enough to get people's attention, and that worked, that part. We do have everybody's attention. So it being a work in progress, let's get together and let's figure out what lands on the corridor, what lands need to be kept in multiple use, and let's include that in the bill. And let's attach maps to the bill that says this is how it's going to be. And we can do that. We can do that. And as far as funds, where's the money going to come from? When this was done, that was one of the big concerns. You know, how are we going to afford the transfer, and then the management, and then that's why included in this is that land can be sold, it can be leased, it can be securitized. Whatever it costs, for instance, to do the transfer, the legislature can, if they put some land up for sale, or the land that is up for sale now that just hasn't sold, and the state moves in, gets that sold, makes that, then that money is available to jumpstart the management on the public land. So that was the idea of this. And that's why I put it in here also to securitize, so if they wanted to, they could borrow money against that land while it's in the process of being sold. But when you think about the $3.1 billion worth of land that's been sold since the year 2000, and the amount of land that is still high-priced land that is still available to be sold, I think that's your answer to where it starts from.
Okay, I guess I'm not seeing in the resolution where that mechanism is in place, so that's something I would definitely need to see before I change my opinion of where things stand today.
Okay.
It does raise another question I have, and in my day job, I work in these arenas and have worked with public land transfers, and I can tell you there is a huge upfront cost to transferring public land. And the report talks about it a little bit, but I think some of the estimates are grossly undervalued. So I'm talking about things like even just the survey, the paperwork that goes along with transferring the lands, environmental phase 1 site assessment, so the state's not taking on some sort of environmental liability like an underground storage tank or something that might be hanging out there. I think what you'll find if you do a more detailed analysis of what some of the recent transfers have been, whether it's City of Yerington or some of these other areas, I think that some of the projections that are in the report are woefully short. And my fear is if we think we're going to have to sell 2 million acres to ramp up and get the front end cost in place, maybe that is in fact more like 4 or 5 million acres.
Well, I didn't say 2 million. And I wish now I could remember how many acres were sold that made that 3.1, but it's a far cry from 2 million acres. There's a lot of valuable land waiting to be sold, and that might as well be going to the state. We might as well be using it.
Yeah, and just so you're aware, the 2 million acre number that I came up with, I had done some research on your organization's website, and there was a brochure there, and it had talked about, we anticipate 2 million acres within phase 1. So that, I'm just using the number that I saw in the brochure. I'm not saying it could be less or more. My fear is it could be a lot more, and I guess that's what I'm trying to convey. So I do have some other questions or points, but I know I've probably taken up plenty of time, and I'll yield the microphone at this point.
Vice Chairman Johnston.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Dahl, for being here. I read through the task force report, and perhaps I missed it. There's a lot of assumptions that work in here that basically Nevada could generate net revenues comparable to other states such as Arizona, Idaho, New Mexico, and Utah. But I didn't see, and there was talk about managing the lands if a transfer was occurred to maximize net revenue, but I didn't see in the report exactly how the net revenue or how the revenue is generated. And when I looked at the comparison, particularly under Table 2, there was a note included there And it said, as shown in Appendix F, the highest observed expense per acre is for Idaho and reflects the management of commercial timber tracts and related harvests. The lowest observed revenue per acre is for Arizona and reflects a significant decline in land sale acreage and value during 2010's recessionary influence. So it looks like some of the assumptions being built in here on this revenue that's going to be generated looking at Idaho, Arizona, and other western states is that revenue's coming from commercial uses on the property, coming from sale of property, certain things that aren't occurring here. So where is the revenue going to come from, this estimate that's being used?
Well, the revenue is going to be coming, from our minerals, from grazing, from rights of way. What I would like to do is bring Mike Boffman, who is the head of Intertech that prepared this, and have him come and lay that out for you. It gets.
But then if the principle is to maximize net revenue, then it would be to maximize those commercial activities on public lands.
Yes.
And I understand, I think there's not a person in this room that is not frustrated at times with federal management of public lands. But if land was still transferred to the state would still be subject to certain federal laws with respect to, for example, wild horses and burros, would still be subject to other federal regulatory schemes. How can the state more effectively manage the land when a big impediment, at least in some people's view, is some of the regulatory burden that's handed down by Washington? That's not going to go away.
I agree. You're right. There's a provision in the Wild Horse Act that the management can be given to another entity, and that's got to happen. Either that's got to happen, or else the federal government is going to have to do something about it, because I think you're all aware, as I am, that this is a problem we just can't continue to live with. It's got to have a resolution at some point.
But then we would have the issue then, if we have, let's say, the transfer to state lands and the state empowered to manage wild horses and burros, the state would find itself in the same position of the BLM, that management activities are then challenged in court.
Right.
And we have to then find resources from the state to fund that litigation time and time and time again. I think there's a lot of assumptions worked into this task force report on revenues and how things are going to might be better without examining some of these deeper issues.
We're doing that right now. We're the state Nevada Association of Counties is in court. We have a hearing on the 14th of March at Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals on our wild horse suit. Our wild horse suit, I think, addresses the problem. If we could win that, we can solve the wild horse problem. And I think the state of Nevada, if the state of Nevada were in a management position on the horses, that indeed they can solve that problem.
Further questions from the commission? Commissioner Hubbs?
Yes, thank you for your time today. I just wanted to go over the timeline again, so all of us are really aware. I know the bill you said died, and these efforts are going to move forward. What is the next step forward, and when do you propose that a new bill would even be ready to be reviewed or presented?
Well, I want to correct one thing that was said earlier. We have actually had 3 hearings on that bill. The last hearing was before a subcommittee in November. The first 2 are what they call flag hearings, but regular congressional hearings before a congressional committee. And then automatically at the end of the 114th Congress, every bill that's hanging fire dies. And so this will be reintroduced, And that's Mark Amaday's bill. It'll be up to him when he does it. I know there are some things that he wants to get in place, like maps to show these areas that we've been talking about. And all of that's in the process. It's being done. So when that's going to be reintroduced, I would expect before very long. Yeah.
Commissioner Rhodes.
Just one more question on that note. If the bill was passed and approved ultimately, how soon would land be transferred to the state from the government? Has that issue been discussed?
Well, in the bill, it just calls for the transfer to happen on phase one. What is the last draft that I've seen on this is it breaks it down where phase one would transfer, and then instead of being phase two, it's broken into 16 years divided by four-year periods, where the state of Nevada would report back to Congress, how did it go? Did the secretary who was instructed to transfer the land, has that secretary made that transfer? Has Nevada been able to afford to manage its land? And was the money that was derived from the management of the land by the state, was it spent where it was supposed to be spent? And then if there are other recommendations for other lands, that should be transferred. And then that would happen every 4 years. So actually it would be 20 years. I said 16, but every 4 years. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you. I guess for me and thinking about it all and looking at the transfer from, federal to state, here in Nevada, we don't have any of the federal, any state laws that are near or around any of the federal laws' scope and breadth in terms of environmental impacts and studies and assessments that need to be made to land of that nature. And I'm concerned that we won't have the infrastructure in place, the manpower in place to properly manage to make sure that the environment's not harmed long term.
My answer would be that NDEP, Nevada Department of Environmental Protection, does a really good job. And that in most instances, the regulations that are administered by NDEP have to be as strict or stricter than federal. And it's been my experience and my observation that NDEP has done a good job. We had testimony from them with our task force, and I don't know why we can't do it. Why can't we manage our own lands, Do you know that our Enabling Act is word for word the same as Nebraska's Enabling Act? And they have 3% federal land, and we have 87%. And they seem to be able to manage their own affairs. I think we can in Nevada.
Commissioner McNinch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Dahl, I appreciate you being here as well.
Thanks.
In reading, I share a lot of the same thoughts that have already been presented. I found reading the report, there were a lot of things that kind of created conflict in my mind. And terms like unequivocally should be, collateralized, sale of select parcels, it wasn't real clear at first, I understand it's phase one. Fiscally neutral, but we're doing it to maximize net revenues. So I didn't get a, I wasn't exactly sure what is the ultimate goal of this whole process. Is it to remove the government from Nevada? I noticed in there that U.S. Forest Service is listed as an agency that would ultimately be not have any lands here. Wilderness, I see in the document one of the main reasons for retaining the wilderness and not making it part of the transfer discussion was because they had value. Yet later in the document it talks about we're not going to, there's no need for more wilderness. So that's conflicting to me. I don't understand why wouldn't it be considered. It's we'll assess these, but then later on we categorically remove some of those things that we were saying we wouldn't earlier. So these are the things that are in my mind. With respect to the one of the major issues, I see two big things in here that stood out to me. The discussion on fire is obviously a big one. Like them or not, I understand the need for economic development, growth, transfer of certain lands. I understand all that, and I'm all for it in the right way. But when it comes to things like fire suppression, whether we like the federal government or not, they have an economy of scale that we'll never be able to match. With regards to the fire suppression and with regards to rehabilitation, management of that process, may not be perfect, but there's certainly, I don't see us being able to match that. The other thing that really concerned me while reading the report had to do with NDOW's involvement. I didn't notice anything in there either that specifically spoke to NDOW being a part of the process. They weren't at the table, and at the 12 meetings that you had, it looks like you had a series of presenters, of which NDOW or none of NDOW was part of none of those, and which tells me, does that mean that they're not in the top 12 having a role? What does it mean? What does it mean that NDOW's not in there? Yet they're recognized as significantly involved in oversight of certain aspects when it comes to the management of those lands later on in the document. So I'm throwing this out because there were a lot of unanswered questions for me as well. I'm not sure if this is the time or place to go over in each and every one of them. I'm not necessarily sold on the whole concept on a whole scale. I guess that's just where I'm coming from. I didn't have any specific questions. I just wanted to give you my impression of the report and these gaps that I'll be searching for answers for ultimately.
Vice Chairman Johnston.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess, as I understood the task force report as well, if the land was transferred, it was going to be held in trust, and it identified the beneficiaries, the primary beneficiary being K through 12 education. And I don't want to suggest I'm not in favor of funding K through 12 education. I absolutely am. I'm a product of public schools and universities my whole life. But isn't there a concern? I mean, if land is held, if any property is held in trust, whatever that property may be, it's to maximize the benefit to the beneficiary. And if the beneficiary under this proposal is education, which I think is a worthy beneficiary of any program, then couldn't it then be in the future used as a way to say, well, we've got a hole in the education budget, sell off more public land, charge more fees. This is the way we're going to fund our public education. I don't see the beneficiary under this trust, except on the last bullet points, being wildlife, public access, public recreation, hunting, fishing, things of that nature. I have a serious concern that the identified beneficiary of the transferred land is education, then people in the future legislatures could use it, so to speak, as the piggy bank to address the needs of education. And I'm not suggesting education shouldn't be funded. It absolutely should be. I have concern over that type of setup, though, and what path that may lead us down.
There was a lot of concern about that. How do you lock it down? How do you make sure that somebody isn't going to come along and say, okay, now let's sell some land? So it was important to have it in the original legislation that comes from Congress that says this is how it will be, and it won't be sold. And there would be ways, I mean, you could go back and get a congressional act to change that. But my reasoning on this is if that happened and if the state decided to sell a bunch of land, everybody that's here and you and me, we would be over here in this next building making our wishes known that that ain't going to happen, right?
But there might be an equal number of people, if not more people, saying education is more important than public lands, therefore sell the land. We don't know how that political debate comes out in the future.
Well,
And if the goal is to maximize revenue off of public land to benefit education, then my concern is it's how much money can we generate, not can we maintain public access and recreational opportunities and support wildlife.
well, once again, I think that would be up to us. You know, that's what we have to agree on, and we have to be the watchdogs to make sure that those kind of things don't happen. Yeah.
Commissioner Valentine and then Commissioner Olmberg.
Thank you, Chairman Wallace. Thanks for being here, Mr. Dahl. I'm just curious, and I'm hoping you can clarify something. Why haven't we modeled this a little more like the Southern Nevada Public Lands Management Act, and in setting aside certain properties, go through a vetting process, public input, you know, and the determination as to whether or not the properties should be sold or some sort of a process to look at the value of the property.
Right, well, that was designed though just to dispose of properties, right? To make them available for people to live on. And there are parts of this that we could do that same thing too. You know, like I said, this is a work in progress. If we wanted to, we could do that with lands that have already been designated for disposal by the federal agencies. The lands that they have determined, there's no need for these to be public lands. These should be privatized. And if we wanted to go, we could go through the same process with those lands if we wanted to. And like I say, it's a work in progress.
Commissioner Olmberg.
Yes. So far, the only real resolution that I've heard for revenue shortfall is land sales. So what happens when we saturate the high-value land market in urban areas? Is the answer high-volume, low-value land sales?
Well, the way I understand this study is that once we got the land transferred, that those land sales wouldn't be necessary in order to finance the management. And with me, one of these times.
A lot better job in doing a feasibility study when we have history. The only history we have here is of a negative. It's negative revenue. That's Nevada's history in land management, and I agree that the state should be able to do a better job, but there's no assurance that we can do a better job and that in fact will be positive revenue.
Well, the history that this was based on was land in Arizona, New Mexico, Utah, and Idaho. And as far as our history, and are you referring to the land that we started with that Nevada had in the very beginning and doesn't have now?
No, I'm referring to Table 17 that shows the Nevada 5-year revenues for the BLM as all being negative.
Okay, well, I'm not sure what you're referring to there. I'll have a look at it.
Further questions from the commission? Commissioner Barnes.
So in that sense, I think it makes a lot of sense. But what happens when, you know, the task force is gone and a lot of those other people are gone? You know, who's going to monitor it, and what could happen down the road? We kind of see how the state has changed over the years, and the concerns that I
Commissioner
have.
Barnes, could you get the microphone closer to you? Thank you.
Is that better? Yeah. Sorry. I guess the concerns I have is down the road. You know, what's going to happen when, like Commissioner Johnson says, we're outnumbered, and I mean, and we could be all of us could be long gone by then, but we could lose a lot of these lands. I mean, we're concerned because we're being controlled by a federal bureaucracy, but the same thing could happen within our own state, you know, over time. And so those are my reservations and the concerns that I have.
Well, Harvey, look at you and I think you're your dad. Yeah, you're right. That could happen. We live in a democracy, sure, but we're losing access now. We're getting less and less say-so over our resources now. I mean, that's what started this whole thing. And how 20 years from now, 30 years from now, how much area we're going to have out there that's shut off from hunting, I don't know. I do believe that left to the state, we have a lot more assurance of being able to continue to hunt out there on the public lands and on more of it than we will if the state isn't in control.
Further comments from the commission or questions? Seeing none, Commissioner Drew.
Yeah, I'm just going to wrap this part up with a quick comment. I could debate this all day. I think it's been very enlightening, but just personally, Mr. Dahl, so you know, I really appreciate you being here today. I know it wasn't probably the easiest to sit down there and field all these questions. I think your vision is noble. I think the state should be able to do a better job. I just don't see how. So at this point in time, I just want to make it abundantly clear. I appreciate your efforts, but where I stand personally right now is I don't support SGR 1. I don't support the previous version of the bill, and I think there's going to have to be a whole lot of work with engagement from a lot of people in this room to get it to a point where we can answer that question in terms of how can the state succeed and how do we not set ourselves up for failure going forward. So again, I appreciate you being here today, and maybe we'll get a chance to discuss it some more.
Okay, well, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dahl. The commission may take action to develop a policy platform and/or designate commission representatives to keep the commission updated as to the development of new federal legislation related to SJR 1. The commission may choose to develop correspondence identifying its concerns or desired clarifications to further develop or refine its position on proposed federal legislation. Commissioner Drew.
Yeah, and just a disclaimer right at the top. I mean, this item C was written very broadly because as we were developing our agenda, it was unclear in terms of how things were going to unfold time frame wise. I was not aware that there would be a listening session with the congressman yesterday, and so again, the views I expressed in that meeting were my own personal opinions, not the position of this board other than our position that was formally adopted on SGR 1 last session. So I think you've heard from Mr. Dahl kind of, you know, the folks that are proposing the idea and the concept. I think you've heard the commission's input on it. I think we're certainly at a point where this commission needs to be engaged in some form or fashion. I know the congressman had indicated that he wanted some input, so I don't know if that input takes the form of you know, some sort of resolution or some other correspondence that identifies some of the concerns that were addressed here today. But more than anything, I think my interest right now just lays in hearing what I know a lot of people in this room are here to visit about. And so I would be looking for input in terms of, you know, maybe how this commission should engage both from our fellow board members, but also from the folks in the audience.
Thank you, Commissioner Drew. Commission comments? This is an action item. I'll take it out for public comment. We'll start in Carson City we'll start with we'll start with the cabs, and then we'll move on to the public in Carson City and Las Vegas. Public comment from the cabs? Public comment from the public in Carson City? Come on up, Dr. Moldy.
I'm Don Moldy-Reno. I certainly do appreciate all the work Mr. Dahl and his committee has done on this issue and pushing the thinking about this whole process forward. I'm not sure I agree with them that this all began recently with the Forest Service travel plan thing. Having been in the state since 1970, I first saw this issue surface in the early 1980s when Dean Rhodes and probably John Carpenter and other Elko ranchers were starting the Sagebrush Rebellion. And to me, this simply looks like another redo of that issue. I agree with much of what the commission has been concerned about. I like Commissioner Valentine's idea about maybe modeling such a bill on the existing lands transfer bill that I think has been quite successful. When I came to this state, 87% was the number used to refer to publicly owned lands in this state. The last number I saw was 81%. So I think there's been a transfer of several percent of federal public lands to the state over the last several years. To me, worst case scenario, just a massive transfer of public lands to states, to me that would represent a takings in my view. I would lose something and gain nothing in return. And I think that would be a bad, I would not appreciate that. Finally, just, you know, the grazing fee was recently in the news. It's just a little over $2 a month now for one cow and one calf, or 5 sheep. Since livestock grazing is one of the largest commercial activities in this state, if not the largest, one wonders what the grazing fee would have to be to maximize income on that aspect of commercial activity on public lands. I have a hunch it wouldn't be $2. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Moldy. Further public comment in Carson City? Come on up.
Just like to remind everyone, if you do speak, please fill out a speaker's card so that we have.
I did. That's why I'm surprised that you're asking at the audience at large. So.
I'm just sending out a reminder to
All
everyone.
right, thank you.
Because I'm anticipating a
was not
number of
remiss
speakers.
on this.
It's not directed at you.
Thank you for having this agenda item. My name is Tina Nappy, and as some of you know, I sat in your place at one point some years ago, but I don't recollect dealing with an issue as interesting and complex as this one, and I really appreciate your taking it on. Before I begin, I'd like to mention one thing that some of your comments you have overlooked in this, and that is the 4 states that they use as examples have been owned as state lands for over 100 years. They're not covered with all of the rights and uses that we now have on our public lands, so including wild horses as one example for this. So the complexity of this is much more concern, and the income derived would have to be far less given those rights. I have a prepared presentation. The Nevada Department of Wildlife is responsible for the management and well-being of Nevada wildlife, except endangered species. Wildlife is dispersed throughout the state, and many species are vulnerable to habitat impacts and may have no fiscal value. NDOW and Nevadans are dependent upon, in particular, big game species, which are widely dispersed. The proposed legislation assures us that all existing rights will be protected under the transfer of lands to Nevada. These rights pertain to livestock grazing permits, mining rights of way, and maybe wild horses in designated herd management areas. Wildlife has no existing rights that I am aware of under state law. NDOW and wildlife interest groups must advocate for wildlife through an EIS, an EA, and various legislation which the federal government has put in place over the years at our request to ensure the future of wildlife. Concurrent with these systems are requirements for documentation and an inclusive public process. The state of Nevada, and particularly the counties, which under this legislation have the last word on the future of public lands in their counties, are not required to invest in or make provisions for wildlife. The goal of this legislation is to negate current protections for wildlife. The proposed legislation recognizes that lands must be managed for their highest and most productive use. As we know, the legislature, session after session, has confirmed that NDOW is starved of general funds and must be dependent on sufficient excess game species and interested sportsmen to provide most of the financial foundation. With so many species of wildlife providing no income or dispersed income, how can wildlife be regarded as the highest and best used at the state or county level? Under the county-based public lands legislation, 85% of the sale of lands is returned to the federal agencies for the purpose of reinvesting in natural resource, acquisition of property, development of recreation, urban interface management, etc. Under the proposed legislation, any profit from the sale will be transferred to the state for administration of public lands or invested in some very worthy educational and education projects. The legislation requires...
Ms. Nappi, I hate to interrupt,
You want me
but
to speed up?
you've reached your 3 minutes. If you have something prepared, if you could present
Okay.
that to the recording
Then I'll
secretary and wrap it up real quick.
So, and no funds in this legislation that I see are going to be returned for range management, which is invested in heavily by the federal government, number one, and by the state, particularly the Department of Wildlife, is the second major investor in range improvements. I saw nothing in that report that suggested investing in range improvement. Furthermore, for all of us, and I speak for Washoe County, which is identified as selling lands for the benefit of this administrative program, that why should Washoe County, I in Washoe County have land sold where the benefits go to the state instead of returning to the county for investments? That has not been dealt with in this, and they were going to take it, most of it, away from all of us. So I feel that even in looking at Washoe County, for instance, when we had hearings last year on a public lands bill, none of this information was provided to us in those hearings. And I think, frankly, people would be shocked to find out that Washoe County was going to be required to sell lands, basically to make PILT, payment in lieu of taxes, pays, or to help fund the state. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Knapp. Next public comment, and I'm gonna, if there's plenty of it out there, if we could kind of get in a line, I think we've already started over here and we can move along. And once again, we're gonna try and keep it to 3 minutes for a person and 6 minutes for a group. So I just want to make sure everybody's clear on that as we get started here. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and members of the Commission for all the work that you do and for taking the time on this very serious matter today. For the record, David Bobzing here on behalf of the Nevada chapter of Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. BHA, if you're not familiar, is the sportsman's voice for our wild public lands, waters, and wildlife. BHA has chapters in 24 states and 1 Canadian province. It seeks to ensure North America's outdoor heritage of hunting and fishing in a natural setting through education and work on behalf of wild public lands and matters. To dive right in, I have a little bit of history on this issue. While serving in the Assembly, I voted against the authorization of the report as a state-sponsored endeavor undertaken by an entity other than the state's Legislative Council Bureau. I have great respect for the Nevada Association of Counties who commissioned the study. I work with them in my local government capacity on a range of issues, but on this, their predetermined outcome that federally managed public lands should be transferred to the state inevitably contaminated, I believe, the report's conclusions. And many of you have been asking the necessary questions today to that end. A lot of testimony was offered during the last legislative session as to flaws, shortcomings of the report, and I'd encourage all of you to review that. I believe many of you are actually pretty versed in it already. And it really kind of comes down to this conclusion that somehow the state would get a good deal out of this scenario, all the while ensuring full public access and environmental quality to the lands so important to our state. No amount of dressing up the numbers solves the essential problem of this whole scheme. Lands managed for multiple use and all the costs associated to provide the range of opportunity as a result including hunting and fishing, that are transferred to school endowment management, and Commissioner Johnson, you were on point on this issue, there's a big disconnect there. When management is driven by the need to maximize return, that management inevitably squeezes sportsmen out. Look to Idaho, Montana, other western states with longer history with school lands, and you will find over and over often sold into private ownership. The need for a quick financial return repeatedly wins out over the long-term costs needed to maintain public ownership. As former chair of the Assembly Ways and Means Subcommittee that was responsible for building the budgets of agencies like NDOW, State Lands, DCNR, and others, I can reinforce what all of you already know sitting in your position as commissioners. We're not exactly flush with cash in this state for managing our resources. But to your charge today, and I think Commissioner Drew laid this out pretty clearly, you're hopefully choosing to develop correspondence identifying concerns or desired clarifications to further develop or refine your position on proposed federal legislation. I would urge you to listen to the voices of sportsmen and other Nevadans who use America's public lands and who object to these risky transfer schemes. The seventh tenet, and that's the one that's at stake, and that's the democracy of hunting. As sportsmen, we have a right to hunt and fish regardless of wealth, land ownership, or other special privilege, and this gets right to the heart. This scheme puts that tenet at risk, and I would urge you to keep asking the tough questions and to voice.
Conservation League. I'm happy to be here today and happy to hear the presentation, and I appreciate the Commission in the 2015 legislative session as it related to SGR 1 and Commissioner 2015 as well. And to this day, we still don't have good answers to them. We don't have answers as to how we can afford it. We don't have answers as to how we can guarantee that our access remains, that this doesn't harm wildlife, that this doesn't harm what 1984 are based on, is deeply flawed. I can just point out a couple of the examples. The report assumes that you can get $1,000 an acre for checkerboard land. I'm not aware of that ever happening, so I don't know where that number even comes from. The revenue projections are based upon 4 states around us that have drastically different natural resource profiles than we do. In the state of Idaho, they have plenty of timber that generates revenue. In the states of New Mexico and Utah, they have coal and oil and gas. We don't really have any of that. The only way we can generate revenue, and the only way we have ever generated revenue with our public lands, is by selling them, and that's exactly what our concern is. When we look at whether our state can do it, and yes, we can all point to issues where we have issues with federal management of our lands, but then you have to ask that next question, and a couple of you actually did in your questions, where it's like, just because we may have concerns with federal management, can the state do better? And what is the reason for why we have issues with those management? A lot of times that comes down to resources. We don't see the resources on the federal level needed to deal with the problems that we have. Wild horses is the best example, where there's a lot of public money, our tax dollars, going into the wild horse program every year, and we still have a problem out on the range. But so let's look to our state and our limited experience in managing horses, and look up to the Virginia range, where our state just doesn't manage these horses at all. So the examples that we have here in our state, last session, and this is a very small example, but it's relevant here, where we wanted to rehabilitate the Stewart Indian School, a very worthy project. But since we didn't have the money to do it, we actually sold off state lands in order to do that. Even for a small project, we can't resist selling off our state lands in our state. And the point remains that when the next budget crisis comes up, that's the first place that lawmakers are going to look to try and balance the budget, and it's going to come at the expense of our access to our public lands. Finally, there's been a lot of talk about changing the way and how this is going to look, and there was some discussion, a meeting I was in yesterday, and we've started to hear some moderation of what we've seen. And while I appreciate that, and I look forward to working with people that are interested in actually solving the problems that we have, solving the issue of the checkerboard, and trying to block that up into more manageable areas, I would be happy to be a part of those discussions. But the fact is, right now, what we're looking at is what passed the legislature last session when all of these issues were brought up, and what has been introduced in Congress. And what is contained in those pieces of legislation is basically a wholesale transfer of our public lands and putting at risk our opportunity to access these lands. SJR 1 and HR 1484 contemplates the entire sale of the checkerboard, not blocking up and making it make more sense in key wildlife areas, selling off every acre in the checkerboard in phase 1. And then in phase 2, it does contemplate transferring the balance, the vast majority of the balance of public lands to the state. Now, I appreciate and believe that Commissioner Dahl would like to keep those in public hands in multiple use. The fact is that's a promise he can't keep. That's a decision that's going to be left up to future legislatures, and that's a risk I'm not willing to take when it comes to access to our public lands, protection of our public lands, and ability to do what we've always done in this state, and a big reason why we all live here. So I would urge, when this commission is deciding what you'd like to do on this issue, certainly stay engaged, stay a part of these conversations. To the extent that they go in a more productive direction, that would be great. But what's on the table right now, I can't see any other decision than to oppose what's being proposed so far. Thank you.
Thank you. Next public comment. Can we hold off on the applause and we'll just give everyone the same respect that's speaking? Thank you.
Is this on? Yes. Chairman Wallace and commissioners, thank you for this time and so much time devoted to this very important issue that's been kicking around for a long time. You know, in my almost half a century of conservation. Oh, I'm sorry, Karen Boger, and I know I come before you with various hats, but today I'm just representing myself because some of the youngsters are wearing those other hats. I appreciate that. So anyway, you know, when I first came to Nevada by choice over almost half a century ago, this issue was out there then. Yes, we do have this wealth of public lands, and yes, they do present some problems, particularly for our rural friends and neighbors. What I would like to see you do is to acknowledge the fact that certainly the checkerboard issue is a nightmare. For management, it's a nightmare for both public and private in terms of access. It definitely needs to be addressed. And perhaps some of the disposal lands, rather than just sitting there marked potential for disposal, could bear a look-see to see if they are better used in some other fashion. But that said, I really hope that you will embrace the notion, or the fact, rather, that we have a very good model in the county-by-county public lands bills that have been occurring over the last 2 decades, and indeed disposing of or selling or repurposing a good deal of our public land already. Those county public lands bills are a preferable way to what is being presented in SJR 1 because, for a number of reasons. Number one, they're county by county, and all of us who love the wild outdoor Nevada, we're interested in every acre of public land out there. And so we want to be involved and taking a careful look at what each county thinks is appropriate in terms of public lands within their county. And we'd like to have the opportunity to be on those stakeholder groups or representatives of our concerns on those stakeholders groups that are also a part of that process. That too is another advantage to this proposal. Thirdly, for instance, with checkerboard lands, they give the opportunity for a very careful site-specific parcel-by-parcel look to see what is best to do with them, which ones are best blocked up for wildlife purposes, which might be better for augmenting rural
Ms. Boger,
communities.
you've reached your 3 minutes.
Oh, my gosh.
Wrap it up real quick for me, please.
Okay. I guess that's it. I hope that's what you'll do. Oh, but I did submit to you my long essay, and I hope it reached you yesterday. So that will include the rest of my thoughts.
Thank you. Next public comment.
Thank you, Chairman Wallace and members of the commission. My name is David Goff. I am representing the Nevada chapter of Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. I am a fifth-generation Nevadan, and this issue is near and dear to my heart. The transfer, sale, or disposal of America's public lands to the state of Nevada is a terrible idea for wildlife and for the American people. The state of Nevada does not have the fiscal elasticity to manage large tracts of public land due to the costs related to wildfires, litigation, and maintenance. State land, as much of us know in Nevada, is not public land. If our federal land is given to the states, public access undoubtedly will be lost. To compare it to a private entity, an owner would not sell their company due to poor management. Processes would be automated, red tape would be dissolved, and unproductive divisions and managers would be replaced. It is the United States Congress who has the ability to improve the Bureau of Land Management and to provide adequate funding to our federal land management agencies. Let's do what's right for our wildlife and wild places and keep America's lands public. Thank you.
Thank you. Next public comment.
Good morning, Commissioners, Chair Wallace, Vice Chair Johnston. My name is Chase Whittemore. I'm here today representing Nevada Bighorns Unlimited. With me here today to read public comment is Tom Fennell of the Reno chapter.
Thank you. I'm speaking on behalf of Nevada Bighorns Unlimited Reno. We have multiple concerns on this issue. First is the ability to manage wildlife on the lands and the potential loss of key wildlife habitat within the proposed transfer. Second is funding for both wildfire and feral horse management. The state simply does not have the financial wherewithal to both suppress wildfires when they happen and also restore fire areas after they burn. One fire like this year's hot pot fire can cost millions of dollars to try and put out, and millions of dollars on top of that in restoration efforts. We don't have the financials nor the personnel at a state level. Also, we do not have the apparatus and equipment at a state level for the suppression that would be needed. In this instance, the federal government has much deeper pockets to help keep our state and the West from turning into cheatgrass. Also, the state's lack of capacity and funding for feral horse management is a concern of ours. Lastly, we have a concern with the actual disposal process and what has been identified to be available for sale. Under the current RMPs, those areas are very poorly defined. I'm worried that if a transfer happens, the acreage that is not meant for disposal will be liquidated to the highest bidder as soon as the state is in a budget crisis. The public land system is uniquely American and is a resource that no other developed country in the world has. Steering that resource towards eventual privatization on a large scale takes away a public resource that all our citizens get to enjoy. And while sometimes the federal government and agencies can be slow and bureaucratic, we feel that it is still the lesser of two evils in this case. We feel this is true for all users of public land in the multiple use format, including industry and agriculture, sportsmen and wildlife, and recreational users. If a new lands transfer bill is introduced and approved, we need to make sure there is no net loss of our public lands and no net loss of access to our public lands. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. Next public comment.
Hi, my name is Remy Warren. I'm a lifelong Nevadan, and I just want to thank you guys, commissioners, for your time. I'm just representing myself as a sportsman of Nevada, and public lands is something that I care deeply about. I think that you guys brought up a lot of good points and questions as far as it looks like you've looked through the documents and seen what I've seen in it, but I just want to reiterate a few points of things that I've noticed that Director Dahl brought up. I've read through a lot of the paperwork multiple times just to kind of clarify a few things. It looks like he came here and said, we aren't planning on selling your public lands, yet there's nothing in that document that says otherwise. I also think a lot of the things have been misrepresented as far as costs go. Initially, the costs for surveying and other things, if you look at phase one, most of the costs are recuperated by selling initial public lands. But if he claims that phase 2 won't sell any lands, where's that money coming from? It'll obviously be through the sale of more lands. I think that part of the thing that he was talking about was the reason they started that was losing access. But when he refers to losing access, it seems like he was talking about possibly road access, or whereas we still have that land. It's not sold to private entities that completely bar us from access. He also brought up Nebraska as an example, and part of my problem is when you look at these other states, there's no example out there where states are doing a good job of managing these state lands and not having to sell them off, blocking access, or charging high fees. You look at the states around us, a lot of the fees that he's believing he'll gain from these public lands are coming from sportsmen's dollars. They're tacked onto tags, licenses, and other things. Sportsmen are footing the bill, and that's part of the thing that he didn't mention is where that money's specifically coming from. There's a lot of people in this room, and it would come down to the commissioners imposing those fees on sportsmen. Nebraska was a state that he mentioned, why can't we be like Nebraska, which has 3% federal lands, whereas Nevada has 87% public lands. Well, one of the things about Nebraska is it has very little state lands. Last time I remember, these might not be exact, but 800,000 federal lands, acres of federal land, and 47,000 acres of state land, which was bought by sportsman dollars on habitat tax stamps. So Nebraska is a horrible example of exactly why we don't want to allow the states to manage these lands. As it is right now, 87% of Nevada is public and usable by hunters. So I'd just like to ask you guys to continue to oppose these bills and to keep these lands in federal hands, because when it comes to being a sportsman in the state, we still have access to these lands, and we don't have to worry about these lands being sold off. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Warren. Next public comment?
Hi, Commissioners. My name is Jason Barnes, and I'm just here representing myself today. I apologize for not having a prepared statement. I didn't plan on speaking. I just wanted to address a couple of things that Mr. Dahl said, and that was one, that NDEP could potentially manage much of these lands if they were sold to the state. And I know in my official capacity I work with NDEP quite a bit, and there's entire bureaus of NDEP that are funded by the EPA. So given what's going on with the EPA, there could be massive reductions in NDEP. And also related to Mr. Dahl's statements, as a multi-generational Nevadan, I connected with what Commissioner Drew said, and I kind of resent the fact that Mr. Dahl tried to use the passion that we have for this state as multi-generational Nevadans to maybe refocus our attention away from the issues and say, oh, we're Nevadans, we're proud, we can manage it better. And that leads me to my final statement, which is what I actually came up here to say, was I work with a ton of different state wildlife management agencies, and I'm incredibly proud to be in this state and to have worked with NDOW, which I think is doing a stellar job with limited resources. And coming here to this commission meeting, I'm incredibly proud that you guys are representing the public, because I think that you actually have the sportsman's interest in mind, and I'm very hopeful that you guys continue your good work.
Thank you, Mr. Barnes. Next public comment?
Hello, my name is Ryan Hughes. I'm representing the University of Nevada, Reno chapter of Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. On behalf of the UNR BHA chapter, we oppose any public land transfers or any transfer of public land. We would like to thank you for hearing us today and recognizing the consequences of transferring these public lands. And we're out there using them every weekend when we get out of class, and we'd like to continue doing so. So thank you very much.
Yes, Commissioners, thank you. For the record, Larry Johnson. I'm President of Coalition for Nevada's Wildlife. I do want to thank Mr. Dahl for coming into the Lion's Den and giving his presentation. He has also been quite frankly, professional and gracious enough to reach out to sportsman groups and give us presentations at a couple of times in the past. Also, want to thank Congressman Amade for his outreach to us. I think we are cautiously optimistic after yesterday's meeting that, number one, that phase 2 of the proposal is most probably going to be deleted, period. Secondly, that phase 1 in this proposal is going to be downsized significantly, and he will seek more local participation before that bill is redrafted and resubmitted, and I have to thank him for that. That being said, where we have obviously significant reservations on the proposals. I didn't prepare written testimony. I presented a very lengthy testimony in opposition of SJR 1 in front of the legislature 2 years ago. Most of the points have been pretty much covered today. My testimony in front of the town hall meeting in Fallon here a month ago on this subject was that I felt that the county land bill process was a much more appropriate methodology of handling the checkerboard issue, when particularly land bills like Pershing County that have local committees, all interests involved, who sit down and conclude, yes, here are gently sloping lands adjacent to Interstate 80 and the UP Railroad that are highly suitable for industrial development. Let's block up those areas for potential transfer and sale for development. Same thing, there was a large ranch, the Sea Punch Ranch, who was hampered by a checkerboard pattern in their grazing management. Let's block up some of those lands, make those available. That sort of thing only makes sense. Small towns throughout Nevada have for decades tried to get a small block of federal land for a cemetery, for waste disposal, for school sites, and the federal bureaucracy has impeded those efforts, and we all are frustrated in the levels and levels of bureaucracy that hamper just common sense. The recreation and public purpose leases to schools. That land should be transferred to the state. It makes sense to transfer to the state possibly lands that are identified for disposal, but those lands identified for disposal should come from local committees, county by county, with all interests involved. And I prefer greatly through the county land process rather than any wholesale transfer of federal lands to the state. It was encouraging to hear yesterday morning also that the National Cattlemen's Association has adopted opposition to wholesale transfer of federal lands, and that the Nevada Cattlemen's Association endorsed that proposal. We just heard that yesterday morning. So I think whether it's agriculture, whether it's sportsmen, we all share a common fear and trepidation that although we are told today very well-meaning promises, those individuals can't guarantee that those promises, that the land will not be sold, that access will not be, that we will not have good areas for wildlife and wildlife management and for sportsmen. Tina Nappy and I met with the Washoe County manager here probably 6 weeks ago, and made those same recommendations to Washoe County. I pointed out in the checkerboard land pattern, southern portion of Area 22, very important for the mule deer wintering and antelope wintering grounds in a checkerboard pattern. Those areas should be blocked up under federal land control, for public land. And in contrast, just west of Wadsworth, there's just in the checkerboard pattern, gently rolling land right next to I-80, has rail access. Why don't we block that up and make it available for industrial development, on and on. There are great common sense ways. The main thing is that we as sportsmen have to pledge to remain
You're coming up on your time, Mr.
involved,
Johnson.
not me, remain involved in the process and come out with a product, quite frankly, that we all can live with for the benefit of all Nevadans. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Next public comment.
Good morning. My name is Carl Archiaga, and I am the Nevada Field Representative for the Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Partnership. I would like to thank you, Board Chairman Wallace, for this opportunity. Before I get into the guts of the lands bill, I'd like to respond to something Commissioner Dahl said. And I have great respect for Commissioner Dahl. There is no one more dedicated to this cause than he is, and he never wavers. I served on that task force that we have been discussing here, and he was probably referring to me as someone who's changed their mind. But I'd like to read a definition of what I think happens in situations like that. And the word is groupthink. Groupthink is a psychological phenomenon that occurs within a group of people in which the desire for harmony and conformity in the group results in an irrational and dysfunctional decision-making outcome. Group members try to minimize conflict and reach a consensus decision without critical evaluation of alternative viewpoints by actively suppressing dissenting viewpoints and isolating themselves from outside influences. I was a victim of groupthink in my mind as I look back on it. I think aside from people like Commissioner Dahl, I think there are a lot of other people who are in favor of this transfer idea that have been subjects of groupthink. It's enough on that. I'd like to thank Commissioner Johnston for pointing out some of the assumptions and the shortcomings in the study. I could go on at length about some of those using the 4 states we use. Reference has been made to timber, coal, oil. But I would just state that my organization and myself, we are completely against, and I never see an opportunity where we would be in favor of phase 2 of this bill, or of SJR 1. We are in favor of completing the lands bill promises that have been made to counties to sell lands, and we are in favor of some resolution to the checkerboard as long as it's done in a deliberate, thoughtful, comprehensive manner, much like Mr. Johnson recommended. Commissioner Dahl mentioned over and over that this was a work in progress. And if it's a work in progress, then it'd be my preference to do that work before there's a bill. I don't think the work was done before H.R. 1484. I'm sure that had the stars all aligned and 1484 had passed Congress, no one would have said, well, wait a minute, this is still a work in progress, we need to change it. I think it would have gone just as it was written. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next public comment.
For the record, Darren Elmore, representing myself as a passionate Nevada sportsman. I'm a 4th generation Nevadan by birth, and my nephews are the 7th generation of Nevadans to run around in the hills of Nevada. I look at this as a big picture. What does all shake down to be reality-wise for future generations, long after I'm gone? And future generations of Nevadan cannot fault today's generations for having to deal with the municipality growth issue. That's not going to change, and we need to create a mechanism to fix that. Future generations will not fault this generation for having to try and clean up the checkerboard problems that our previous generations didn't really ever think would certainly come to this point. The two issues where future generations will hold all of us accountable, and I say that taking stock today because I haven't ever been to one of these meetings where I've seen so many other young faces, so there is some feel good to be had. But future generations will hold us accountable for two things, and that is the notion that we can apply a value on the flats of Imlay where checkerboard issues exist, or the treetops of the Pequops. Because my value to take my bird dogs and run around in the high country is no less or no greater than the kid in Las Vegas who wants to go out in the desert and fly his drone. It's the same value. And I think that we as sportsmen often lose sight of that. I also take stock today. I've never agreed with so many people that I've never disagreed so much with before. There's something to be said for that. So the notion that high ground or low ground has differing value, I think, is one that we ought to be really careful about going down that slope. The second notion, I will say, I'm married to an educator in this state. My sister is an educator in this state, and future generations will hold today's generations accountable for continuing to hijack notions of sticking your finger in the dike to solve the education problem in Nevada. And it's the concept of the potential of selling off state lands, which I foresee as reality, unfortunately, is nothing more than a plug in the dike. And until all Nevadans want to take an ugly look behind the curtain of what is happening in this state on an educational level, selling off public lands, $3.1 billion, it's all for naught. Future generations will hold us accountable for ignoring ugly realities. Yes, it's no fun, but the realities are, do we need to sell off some public lands? Probably. We have some issues that need to be solved. But at the same time, doing it under the politically and publicly popular notion that it's going to solve bigger problems is not a reality looking down the long-term pipe. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Elmore. Further public comment? Come on up, Paul.
For the record, Paul Dixon speaking on behalf of myself. Darren kind of stole a little bit of what I was going to say because I hadn't heard it in here today. And that is, I've been attending commission meetings now for over 9 years. And what I've seen is a deeply divided group in this room many, many times. Sportsmen versus conservationists versus non-consumptive users of our wildlife. And I wanted to say that I think it says something amazing when you see the entire body of people in here today, depending on wherever their background is, all telling you that we need to go into this land transfer very wide-eyed opened and looking at the impacts of it, because it impacts all of us. And Darren said it, that, you know, as many times we've been at odds with a lot of people in this room, some of the hunters and sportsmen, and today we're united, and that says something powerful in a nation that's deeply divided. And I think that we should use the power of that camaraderie and common purpose that we have here to make sure that we, if we end up, as Darren said, having to sell some of our public lands, we do it in a very reasoned and knowledgeable fashion that protects as much as we can of our public heritage here and leaves it that way. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Further public comment in Carson City? Seeing none, I'll take it to Las Vegas. Public comment in Las Vegas?
No public comment, Mr. Chairman. No, we want to speak.
Thank you. I'll bring it back to the commission for further discussion.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
Las Vegas does want to speak.
Okay, go ahead.
Chairman Wallace and Commission, thank you very much. Robert Gaudet, President of Nevada Wildlife Federation. I'm sure you have two of my emails that one I spent last week and one I sent this morning. American sportsmen and sportswomen were the original force behind the creation and protection of our public lands, stepping up and fighting fiercely to protect our forest, our mountain ranges, our water that provide habitat for our wildlife and fish that they pursue. thanks to the past and ongoing efforts of sportsmen and other conservationists, all Americans benefit from our national heritage. Our public lands are beloved landscape where our grandfathers taught us how to fly fish in a hidden spot along a cold mountain stream, where we learned how to track white-tailed deer across a densely wooded forest, and where we sit quietly with our dogs and watch a rambunctious flock of geese rush across the fading skies. Our public lands are under attack from a minority of legislators and private interests who seek to carve up outdoor legacy and transfer these lands to state and private ownership. The loss of these public lands would lead to the disappearance of places we value by an overwhelming majority of Americans and likely limit or lose access to long enjoyed hunting and fishing areas. The Nevada Wildlife Federation, along with the National Wildlife Federation, with members and supporting numbers over 6 million, is a diverse organization representing sportsmen and women, along with other recreationalists, is asking members of the public to support keeping national public lands in public hands. As sportsmen and women, as historical protectors and advocates of our public lands, we must pledge to protect these cherished birthright. Despite the many problems that state and municipalities face today, our budget shortfalls to unemployment, 7 western states have decided to embark on unconstitutional and unrealistic battles, attempting to force the federal government to turn over millions of acres of public land over to the states. Doing so would result in an inevitable explosion of private profit for those beautiful parks, refuges, forests, and other lands, because of the leaders driving such efforts would prefer to quick economic gain from the resource extraction rather than prioritizing these efforts. It is important to keep in mind that these attempts are unconstitutional, according to case law dating back to the 1800s, and therefore will only serve to waste taxpayer money. Each of the states' attempt to force Congress to turn over the land referenced in the State Enabling Act, the language that was made in the state when the state began. Proponents of the federal land, the federal government has not kept their promise to give back the land. The land is never owned by the states. But this is not true. Each of these enabling acts that the states agreed to, the state of Nevada agreed to it, and it says, I quote, that the people inhabiting this territory do agree and declare that forever disclaim all rights and titles to unappropriated public lands laying within said territory, and that the same shall be and remain at the sole and entire disposition of the United States. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gaudet. Any further public comment in Las Vegas?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Jana Wright for the record. I stand with my fellow Nevadans in opposition to SJR 1 and any transfer of the public lands, and I encourage the commission to develop correspondence identifying these concerns and staying on top of this issue for us. Thank you.
Thank you. Further public comment in Las Vegas?
Yes, this is Stephanie Myers from Mount Charleston. I'd just like to echo what Paul Dixon had to say from our Clark County CAB, in that this is kind of a rare opportunity where both sportsmen and women and animal advocates are on the same side of the fence here, and I hope that the Wildlife Commission will take note of that consensus. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Myers. Anything further in Las Vegas?
No further comment in Las Vegas, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I'll bring it back to the commission for further discussion and possible action. Commissioner Drew?
Yeah, just a quick thought, and I really appreciate everyone coming today. I know this was an issue of a lot of interest and a lot of concern to folks, and I'm glad those folks showed up today. I think it's pretty clear that we've heard a mandate for this body to get engaged and develop correspondence. And I know this is probably going to create more work for me in a time when I'm not really sure when I'm going to find how to do it. But I would be willing to develop a correspondence, but in my opinion, this is not going to be one of those correspondences where we assign Commissioner Drew to send a letter without review of this body. So anything I think that we draft, A, I could use a lot of help with, and B, I think needs to come back through the process so the county advisory boards can see whatever correspondence we have. The public can see that. We can have broader buy-in than just a couple of people developing something, because we have a lot of input to try and sort through today.
Thank you, Commissioner Drew, for volunteering for that. Commissioner Young?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I hadn't really said anything on this yet, but it's pretty obvious. You know, I think Mr. Elmore kind of reflects my thoughts the most, and Paul and Stephanie and down there. You know, it's the first time in 5 years I've heard agreement on things. It's nice to come to a meeting and see all of us pretty much supporting something we all know is morally right. We're lucky enough to live in this state, and all of us that have hunted or hiked or enjoyed our outdoors, you know, one of the greatest things is the ability to go almost anywhere. And you go to Colorado or a lot of other states, and you got fences and no trespassing signs, and you can't do this and you can't do that, and we can't sell it's like selling our kids off. And, you know, there's no way we should do this without at least having a plan that works for everybody. And I agree with Jeremy, we got to put a lot of careful thought into this and get up, you know, everybody's opinion and buy-in, because it seems pretty unanimous that we're all on the same page pretty much. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Young. Any further commission comments?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to make a quick comment. I'm not opposed in totality to any transfer of public land. It can occur, and it can be done in a proper way, and it can be done in the right way, and when it's done that way, it can have benefits for a lot of different interests. But I do believe, when I started reading this report yesterday on the plane back from Washington, it was I viewed it with a lot of skepticism. And then I kept an open mind, and then there was just not the detail that I wanted to hear. It was a lot of assumptions, a lot of no explanation as to some of those assumptions. And then I kept going, and I tend to believe that local governments can a lot of times do things better than the federal government. But in this instance, I don't think that plan has been shown, and certainly not on this grand scale that's being considered. So I'm happy to work with Chairman Drew on the letter as best I can, or I think but I would certainly say that my motion, if we're ready for a motion, would be that this commission draft a letter that, one, outlines the policy of this commission as previously adopted with respect to federal land transfers, and that opposes and voices its opposition to proposals that would just wholesale land transfers statewide, or even on a county-wide basis, without detailed analysis as to the impacts on wildlife, public use, public access, and how those lands would be managed, and how the financing for that management would be done. There's a whole host of other details I could include in the motion, but I believe, based upon the conversations, we'd be all clear on the direction.
I have a motion by Vice Chairman Johnston. Do I have a second? I have a second by Commissioner Almberg. Any questions on the motion from the commission?
Just a couple clarifications. Commissioner Johnson, I just want to clarify that you and I would kind of be assigned to developing that draft letter, and that it would come back before this body, probably at the March meeting.
No, I think you're being assigned to draft the letter, and I would give some input on it.
Aha.
But I will work with you, yes.
Everyone clear on the motion? Commissioner Drew, are you okay with that motion?
With reluctance.
I'll call for the question. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, motion passes unanimously. We're going to skip agenda item 4, and that will be at the call of the chair, but we will move on to agenda item number 5. Member items, announcements, and correspondence. Chairman Wallace, informational. Commissioners may present emergent items. No action may be taken by the commission. Any item requiring commission action may be scheduled on a future commission agenda. The commission will review and may discuss correspondence sent or received by the commission since the last regular meeting and may provide copies for the exhibit file. Commissioners may provide hard copies of their correspondence for the written record. Correspondence sent or received by Secretary Wasley may also be discussed. I'm hearing from my fellow commissioners we're looking for a break, and I think what I was looking for is to maybe get through agenda item 7 and just take a lunch break, or do we want to go ahead and take a quick 5-10 minutes right now? Okay. All right. Works for me. Commissioners? Commissioner Drew.
I had a couple. Prior to the holiday, I was able to attend the Legislative Commission meeting here in Carson City, and there was a host of our regulations up, and I think it would behoove me to report that a couple of our regulations were deferred back to the committee, and I think I've reported this to the chair, but for the sake of the rest of the commissioners. So one of the regulations that we had before the Legislative Commission was the regulation that dealt with firearms provisions related to muzzleloaders, handguns, large caliber weapons, and smart rifles. I think the Legislative Commission astutely identified that the last 2 of those provisions were controversial, and in deferring the regulation back to the commission, asked that we remove the controversial provisions and forward back the regulation with only those portions specific to muzzleloaders and handguns. The other regulation that got deferred was the regulation pertinent to the Truckee River. The concern expressed there was, I think we had stated something in that regulation along the lines of use of powered motorcraft is prohibited or something. If you'll remember, this came forward from Washoe County, City of Reno, City of Sparks, trying to prohibit hovercrafts on the river. The individual who indicated concern with that regulation felt that by doing our regulation in the manner we did it, we would be prohibiting someone from a small electronic trolling motor from using the lower reach of the river, and that we should simply state hovercrafts if that is truly the intent. So those 2 regulations are in limbo officially, probably something we need to address at some point. I would just point out also that yesterday we were invited by the joint legislative committees, Natural Resources in the Senate and Natural Resource, Ag and Mining in the Assembly, to present an update or an overview of the Department of Wildlife. Director Wasley had requested someone from the commission be there, and with Commissioner Wallace's approval, I was able to represent the commission. I think we had a very good discussion. There's a lot of new faces on the committee, and I think it was good to give them an overview of just how much the department does, as well as the commission's role. So those are the 2 items I wanted to mention today.
Thank you, Commissioner Drew. Vice Chairman Johnston.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll provide copies to Suzanne. With Mr. Janae's help, I finalized 2 letters, one regarding the Nellis Air Force Base or Nevada Test and Training Range, and then also the Fallon Range Training Complex. That followed the meeting we had in November. So those letters were finalized. Obviously, given the time frame of the due date being before our next commission meeting, I had to review the commission meeting on video, finalize the letters myself with Mr. Janay's help because I couldn't circulate them to everybody for input without issues regarding the open meeting law. So I'll provide those letters to Suzanne. And then I also received a telephone call from a gentleman out of Elko. And I just wanted to bring it to the commission's attention. He had approximately, I think it was 20 bonus points for a sheep tag, drew his sheep tag. His mother passed away. Obviously was not able to hunt. He put his tag in the mail, and the post date indicated that he mailed it prior to the start of the hunt. Unfortunately, it did not have the necessary postage to actually get delivered to the Department of Wildlife and was returned to him. As a result, once he did actually get it in the hands of the Department of Wildlife under Nevada Administrative Code, it was too late. He called me regarding possible restoration of bonus points and what he could do. And the law in the Administrative Code is quite clear that the tag has to be in the hands of the department. So this is about as unfortunate of a scenario as I could come up with. I did share that and made a telephone call to the department to share that I received the call. I think this is a lot different than some of the other circumstances we've heard about. And I don't know if there is any appetite by anyone else to create any type of review process for such a scenario. I don't believe certain people are in favor of that because you need a hard, identifiable rule that's cut and dry and black and white. When you hear insufficient postage as being a result of someone losing their bonus points, or can't get, not only did they lost their bonus points, but I believe now they would be in the waiting period, even though not successful or not having an opportunity to hunt. Now they don't have the bonus points. The possibility of drawing that tag again after the waiting period, building up some bonus points, is probably gone, given the man's age. So I just wanted to let the commission know that I did receive that phone call, and I've had at least one telephone call and a couple voicemail messages. I did indicate to him he probably was not going to like the message I had to give to him when I called him back, because I was pretty confident what the administrative code said in this regard. So, but I wanted to share that with everybody.
Thank you, Commissioner Johnston. Anything further from the commission? Commissioner Hubbs.
It's been a little bit of time, so I'm trying to go back and remember who I've talked to. But I just had two issues arise on my end. Similar to Brad, I was contacted by a gentleman, with an issue with traps outside of, I think he was in Nye County actually. But, he had violated some type of regulation and had been found to have allegedly violated it. And I forwarded that over to Mr. Ward in terms of dealing with that gentleman. But it brought to mind, what do we do in those situations too when we get the information prior? That's potentially something we could hear at a commission meeting from a citizen, and knowing about it before it's presented in that manner. Just kind of curious as to that. And then secondly, I was contacted again concerning the Project Coyote wanting or thinking about presenting or trying to see if they could put forward a new video that they're developing. They later contacted me and said that they were not in the correct stage to put it forward, but we're hoping that at one point they could at least run it by somebody through the department and see if it would be worthwhile to present that.
Thank you, Commissioner Hubbs. I think I'm going to defer to someone in the department on that, but I feel like there would have to be an appeal filed or something before it would be able to make it to our agenda. Mr. Ward, would you be able to answer that?
For the record, Deputy Attorney General Harry Ward. In regards to the tags, I'll just briefly say for bonus points or anything like that, there is litigation. I'm sure this board's very well aware of that. the NAC prevents or ties our hands as to what we can do in regards to if it was not delivered in a timely manner. And what was the other question, Mr. Chair or Commissioner Hubbs?
Just when we're contacted from the general public on issues or concerns for citations, and knowing that could potentially come back into us for some type of hearing at a later date.
My recommendation and suggestion would be, if it does come up before the commission, that you make it a public record, that you have some information, and then you make your own determination whether you have to recuse yourself or not, and give an explanation as to why you would or would not, and just make it public. And that would be my recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. Ward. Further commission comments? Hearing none, we'll bring it to Mr. Wasley.
Thank you, Chairman Wallace. I received two letters that I would like, I believe the commission also received copies of these, but I would just like to mention them. First, I received a letter and a petition on Tuesday. The petition contained 142,000 signatures asking that the Nevada Board of Wildlife Commissioners in the Nevada bear hunt at this meeting. And then on Wednesday, I received a letter from the Nevada Outfitters and Guides Association in full support of the black bear season in Nevada, stating that they did not support the proposal to standardize the season prescriptions, and that the Nevada Outfitters and Guides Association did support the mountain lion season and harvest limits, and those were the two forms of correspondence I believe you've all received. If you haven't, we'll certainly make sure they're in your hands. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Wasley. Anything further from the commission? Seeing none, we'll move to agenda item number 6, County Advisory Boards of Managed Wildlife Member Items, Informational. County Advisory Board members may present emergent items. No action may be taken by the commission. Any item requiring commission action will be scheduled on a future commission agenda. When the red light's on, you're good.
Okay, Sean Shea, Washoe County. Actually, we would like to see all of a sudden the state has gone away with the sale of hides. You know, animals that were hit by vehicles or hit by seizures or animal damage control. So they're getting away from the sale of those hides, and I'd like to know why. You know, I see NDOW has got image problems every once in a while, and this just shows that we're trying to do something with these with this animal that we can do with it. And I guess getting away from it, I don't know who makes that decision, and you know, I would like to see something come up in front of you guys about this. You know, how many of these are given to schools for education? How many are given to tribes or museums or something, and why they're getting away from this, using this. I mean, it might not make very much money, but I think it's a good public image that you're trying to do something with these animals that were, it doesn't matter how they were taken, but you're actually trying to do something with this instead of just scrapping them, which is the plan, like Oregon does. So I'd like to see something come back for that.
All right. Thank you, Sean.
This, for the record, Corey Lytle, Lincoln County. I kind of hesitated whether to bring this up or not. I've sent this email to several staff and a couple of the commissioners. We've talked about this in the past. It's been a few years talking about it. It got battered back and forth, but Utah just the other day decided that they were going to do a statewide antler gathering closure. Okay, and on January 31st, they signified that there were going to be 11 counties with this closure, basically making it illegal to pick them up, possess them, etc. What they realized about a day after that notice went out was, well, all the counties that have the closure, they're just going to go to all the open counties. So then they issued another one on February 2nd that included the whole state. And we are just bracing, because it's going to flood our eastern border. And we'll sit and watch it. I know Chief Turnipseed knows about this. Our local law enforcement knows about it. It's going to be interesting to see what happens. They shut everything down in Utah till the end of March, so March 31st. So the month of March is going to be very interesting. White Pine County, some of Elko County, and Lincoln County. So just to throw that out there, we'll see what happens and see what we can do. What's that? Yeah, it's just in you know, to the end of March is what they're saying. So you're not supposed to pick them up, private or public land. I thought that was interesting.
Further caps? Come on up, Paul. Thank you, Corey.
For the record, Paul Dixon, Clark County. Since the March meeting will be in Vegas, we're talking waterfall. I wondered if this commission, if you had thought about Grant or Brad doing some side tours like out to Overton or something the day before, or other things, or heading out and talking since they've reopened Willow Beach fish hatchery or something, to do something when the commission's down there in Vegas to introduce the public and other things to some of the stuff, and for you guys that haven't seen Overton or haven't been there in a while since the floods and stuff, the rebuilding and that sort of thing. So I just wondered if we had planned for anything or if we were just going to have a standard commission meeting is all. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. As of right now, I don't know of anything, but I think it's a worthwhile discussion, and I'm glad you brought it up.
Thank you.
Thank you. Further cabs? Seeing no further cab comment, we'll move to agenda item number 7, approval of minutes. Chairman Wallace for possible action. Commission minutes may be approved from the November 18th and 19th, 2016 meeting. Have the commissioners had a chance to review the minutes? Any comments on the minutes from the commissioners? Seeing none, this is an action item. I'll take it out to public comment in Carson City. Seeing none, public comment in Las Vegas.
No comment in Las Vegas, Mr. Chairman.
With no public comment, I'll bring it back to the commission for a motion.
I'd move to approve the minutes.
I second that. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
That's all right.
Ready for lunch. Go ahead.
Move to approve the minutes from the November 18th and 19th Nevada Board of Wildlife Commissioners meeting as presented.
And I second that.
I have a motion by Commissioner Johnson and a second by Commissioner Hubbs to approve the minutes as presented. Further questions or comments from the commission? Seeing none, I'll call for the question. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, motion passes unanimously. And I think we'll work on taking a lunch break until 1:15. Actually, recalling the last experience, let's go 1:30.
How would you like that? It's official postage.
I'll tell you what, that one actually, that story got worse as you